Welcome, everybody. My name is Dave Bailey, and this is Grief and Grace. And I want to thank you for joining us and being a part of what we're doing tonight. Grief has so many faces, and it is perhaps more than anything else the common human experience that ties us all together, regardless of race or color or creed or age or language or whatever. And the goal of this Facebook Live is to be a space where we can learn about and talk about grief in all of its multifaceted ways. And so we've had authors and therapists and death doulas and documentary producers and funeral celebrants and researchers, a wide variety of people, all sharing their insights and understanding of grief. And my guest tonight is Shelby Forsythia. Shelby's a grief guide, the host of the podcast Coming Back, which is about life after loss. She's the author of Permission to Grieve, and she's just released a new book called Your Grief, Your Way, which we'll talk about today. Shelby, I'm glad you've made time to join us here at Grief and Grace.
Thanks so much, David. I'm excited to be here too.
Thank you. So let's start with this. Why don't you tell us a little of your background and what started you working in the field of grief and loss?
Yeah, well, that's always a big question because I don't know that anybody who works in grief and loss knows that they're going to work in grief and loss. Like if you had told me when I was a kid that this is what I was going to do with my life eventually, I probably would have laughed or would have asked for the full story.
There you go.
And then I wouldn't have been able to comprehend because I didn't know what was to come. Essentially, the very, very short of it was that there were about 4 years of my life from the time I was 17 to the time that I was 21, where I had back to back to back to back to back to back losses that were unrelenting. They affected many members of my family. And the final horrific cherry on top of the experience was the death of my mother from breast cancer that returned and took her life in 2013. And ironically, not ironically, it was the day after Christmas, which was her favorite holiday. And as we tilt now into the holiday season, there's always some grief that starts to come to the surface because my body and even my spirit remembers what it's like to be and to live in this time of year. And navigating her death was one of the hardest things I had to do because I was 21 when she died. And so I was on another podcast recently and the host referred to your early 20s as launch pad years. And I was getting ready to launch myself into my life. I was getting ready to figure out what was next and arrive into the world to present myself to go for all the dreams that adults my whole life had been telling me to go for. And I was starting off with a massive grief event. And so I felt broken or impaired or damaged or incapable in some way. And instead of, announcing myself to the larger world, I really kind of hobbled along for about 2.5 years or so. And there was this moment that I write about in my first book, Permission to Grieve, where my wallet got stolen in downtown Chicago. And when that happened, I kind of told myself internally all the same stories that came up when my mom died of the world is not a safe place. I can't trust anybody. All my foundation is gone. And in that moment, I allowed myself to break down, to scream, to cry, to bang my fist on the ground, everything that really needed to happen. And this little voice inside me, after it all got out, was like, you just gave yourself permission to grieve.
Wow.
And I was like, what is that? And it felt very revolutionary to me to just allow my emotions and allow the experience of grief without trying to dampen it or hamper it in some way. And that became the start of the cracking open towards my study of grief and what does it mean to allow grief to happen, to give yourself permission to grieve without needing it to be something else or to look different than it does. And so I started listening to grief podcasts, tuning into videos like this one, reading grief books by other people. And I was like, oh my gosh, other people make it out of this alive. And not only are they alive, but they thrive. Wow. And I started sharing what I was learning on social media. And to make a long story extremely short, I shared enough things that people liked that they said, you should do this for a living. And so over the course of 4.5 years or so, people have suggested podcasts, which I started doing. People have asked me to write books, which now I've written too, and to work with them one-on-one and in workshop settings too. And so it's just morphed based on people say, this is helpful to me. Can you do more? And my answer is yes, here it is. Here we go. Wow. And so I never thought I would be an entrepreneur at this level. I never thought I'd be in the grief space. And here I am doing both after the still horrific worst thing that's ever happened to me, which was the death of my mother in 2013.
Wow. Wow. So that was Permission to Grieve. That's how Permission to Grieve got birthed. Your next book that you've just now released is called Your Grief, Your Way, A Year of Practical Guidance and Comfort After Loss. We're going to spend most of the night talking about this book. So describe it for us and how it came to be.
So is my latest book came out less than a month ago, and it's a non-religious daily devotional for grief. And the reason that it exists is because so many grieving people can't focus after a loss, and this was me. So after my mom's death, I was in my final semester of college, and I had to take a 15-hour course load, and I was writing my honors thesis, and I was doing so many other things to try to graduate on time. That was my mom and my dad's kind of final wish for me, is like, don't quit school, don't leave. And so I was like, okay. And so somehow I forced myself to focus in those spaces. But I remember very distinctly looking at pages, staring at text, even listening to my professors talk and not comprehending a thing or a word that they were saying. And it was intensely frustrating to me. I was like, what has happened to my mind in the aftermath of loss? And I found I could only hold my focus for a paragraph or two at a time. And so Your Grief, Your Way is this small daily devotional, like a quote a day, a paragraph a day, one exercise a day. Read it, digest it, put it down. Nothing more is required of you. And yet there are these little powerful pieces that you can build on each other throughout the course of 366 days of the year to incorporate the experience of grief into the larger picture of your life. So it's not a book for getting over grief. It's not a book for moving on or letting go. It's definitely, how can you take the very worst thing that's happened to you and allow it to be a part of the larger story that you are continuing to live by living your life.
Wow. And I see you've had one of your staff members join you there, the cat.
Oh, yes.
There were so many wow moments for me reading through the book. And if it was up to me, you'd just start at January 1st and read and comment on every day's entry, but obviously we don't have enough time for that. So I'm going to ask you to read specific days and unpack them for us, and we'll do as many as we can in our time together. And if you're watching and you want Shelby to read your day, either the day you lost someone or the day of their birthday or whatever a day makes, whatever makes it special for you, if you put that day in the comments, we'll read it and unpack as many of those as we can as well. So I'm going to ask you to start at January 24th and the whole idea of while grieving. And so just read it for us, unpack it for us, and then take us into January 25th and the idea that the object of grief is not to make the grief go away, but to expand your heart. And I told you before when we were talking, to me, that's just like, that's worth the price of admission right there. That is just a brilliant sentence. So take us through January 24th and 25th.
Yes, yeah. And I'll tell you, the layout of the book, if I can kind of show it
Yes,
here,
of
you'll have
course.
2 entries on every page. The top entry will always be a quote with some commentary, and then the bottom will always be some kind of practical exercise. So this could be a journaling entry, this could be actual exercise that you do in your home, this could be a meditation or visualization. It's always something practical that kind of helps you put roots down in the ground, in addition to the quotes. And the entries are always related. So this will always be related to the thing below it, and this will always be related to the thing above it. So January 24th says, when you feel confused, forgetful, overwhelmed, or like you're only going in circles, give yourself grace and mercy. Think about all the tasks you do in a day and add while grieving to the end of each. For example, I drove my kids to school while grieving, or I sat through a 2-hour meeting while grieving. Looking at your everyday to-dos through the lens of grieving helps remind you that you are doing everything you used to do before your loss occurred, and now you've got big, unavoidable grief in the mix too. So when you accidentally put your keys in the freezer, you can let yourself off the hook. I misplaced my keys while grieving. And the reason that I included this in January 24th, it's actually something I teach in an online course called Life After Loss Academy. But so much of my work in grief is about giving people just a little more room to breathe or a little bit more space to be human. In the experience of grief, we have these such, gosh, high expectations of ourselves that we should be the same people that we were before, even though grief is now in the picture. And in reality, we're not. And so adding while grieving to the end of your everyday tasks gives you just a little bit more grace and mercy. It's like, oh, I forgot to do that thing. Oh, while grieving. Or I'm doing this task while grieving. And it changes the nature of how we do things. It changes how we show up in the world to say, I'm doing it while grieving. And it also helps us acknowledge that we're carrying something very heavy as we're doing the mundane tasks of our everyday, or as we're doing, I call them have tos during the day. They're the things we have to do to survive. I'm making breakfast for myself while grieving. And so just acknowledging the added weight of that can help us allow ourselves a little bit more humanness in the midst of an experience where we often put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be superheroes. And then
Yeah,
January
let
25th.
me just say that I just think that's brilliant. I love that. I laughed, I chuckled so much at that sentence. I put my keys in the freezer while grieving, because we affirm so many negative things to ourselves. You know, we, whether it's from a bad golf shot to the keys in the freezer to I can't find where I put my phone down, and we'll affirm to ourselves, "You're such an idiot." And then we ask this open-ended question, "What is wrong with you?" As if there is something wrong. And so we just pile this negative sense on ourselves. And, you know, we call this Facebook Live Grief and Grace, because that's what you need in the middle of grief. You need to just so much grace for yourself. And to just have that little mantra, yep, keys in the freezer while I was grieving.
Grieving.
Yeah, as long as
Yeah.
it wasn't the toddler in the freezer while I was grieving. You know,
Right.
something like that's probably not a good idea. But keys you can get by with. Yeah. So yeah,
Right.
brilliant. While grieving, brilliant. All right, January 25th.
Yes, January 25th is a quote entry. So it starts with, "The goal is not to win, but to open up." And this is by Brian L. Weiss. And the commentary that I wrote below this is, contrary to many societal teachings, there is no conquering grief. It's impossible to win at an emotional experience like loss because grief is not that kind of game. The object of grief is not to make the grief go away, but to expand your heart to make room for it. When you live with an expanded heart, there is room for you and your grief to exist side by side. And I get
God, I
chills
love
every
that.
time I read this.
Oh, no kidding. The object of grief is not to make the grief go away, but to expand your heart. Oh my God. Yeah.
Mhm. And this came from a picture I so often have with my clients, and I had this for myself when I was first grieving. So this is never other people's problem. It was always my problem first, and then I kind of negotiated how to live with it, and now I see it in other people as a pattern in a lot of grievers. And I thought grief was my biggest enemy. I thought grief was trying to take me out. And so if I had a picture of grief, there was me on one side and grief on the other, and we were doing battle with each other. And so there was very much this conflict or adversarial energy, and I had to overcome it, and I had to try. It was very David and Goliath kind of energy. Um, and then to move grief beside us, so a seat next to you at the table, like a companion or an ally or even a partner, is a different kind of life with grief,
Yes.
because it's like, okay, what do you need to be able to survive? Here's what I needed to survive. What do you need to survive? And you go
Wow.
forward in motion together as opposed to constantly combating. This is something I still have to practice because grief continues to show up throughout our lives. And so in these moments when I feel like, oh, I'm so sick of grief and I wish you'd just go away, and I feel like you have the power and I have none, it's a fascinating reframe to move grief from the thing that you're fighting that's in front of your eyes to the thing that sits beside you at the table and is actually trying to help you survive and move forward.
Wow. Brilliant. Brilliant. All right. Take us to February 21st,
Yes.
where you talk about fear and bravery are allowed to coexist.
Oh, yeah. This is an exercise too. This is fun because I think that people think to be brave is to have no fear. And so February 21st reads, "Try thinking of fear as a backpack with straps permanently glued to your shoulders. In a journal or notebook, write, 'The fear I'm carrying today is,' and then insert your fears here. List as many as you'd like. For example, the fear of forgetting my loved one, or the fear that my life will always look like this. Once you've listed all your fears for the day, write at the bottom, and I am choosing to show bravery by insert actions here. Then list all the ways you're going forward despite the fear on your back. For example, going to work, attending my first grief support group, or even simply getting out of bed. By visualizing fear as a constant companion, you give yourself permission to walk through each day with strength in every step. Fear and bravery are allowed to coexist.
So good. And I think that I love what you said. You're giving yourself permission, and I love the intent of the book over and over and over again is that permission giving, that affirming that you're a good person, you're doing a good thing, you're on a good track, no judgment, no fear, no anxiety, just here's permission. It's okay to be absolutely fearful and absolutely brave at the same time.
Yeah, and there's this story we tell ourselves that brave people don't look like XYZ. And
Mm.
usually, brave people aren't anxious. Brave people don't ruminate on stories. Brave people don't replay the final moments of their loved one over and over and over again. Brave people aren't afraid to go to the grocery store for fear of being triggered. Brave people aren't afraid to. One of my triggers in life after loss was driving by the exit for Duke Hospital in Raleigh, because that's where both of my
Yeah.
parents were separately treated, and where my mom spent some of the last days of her life. She was eventually transferred home. But I was like, brave people don't freak out when they see a sign on the interstate. And this is a place where in grief, yeah, they definitely do. Brave people see that sign on the interstate and they drive by
Mm-hmm.
anyway with the tears in their eyes and continue going to wherever their final destination is. And so it's like you don't have to remove the backpack of fear in order to be allowed to be brave. You can have the backpack of fear and also keep walking with it
Yes.
on.
And don't judge yourself.
Right. Easier said than done. All of these are
Oh my God.
practices.
Yes.
You will not magically be healed from grief by doing one exercise in this book, but I assure you, in continuing to do them in the presence of other people or even just by yourself is a really powerful way to, again, just give yourself more of that space to breathe or for your shoulders to come down
Yes.
a little bit. Yeah.
Yes. I love the word that you use, practices, because that's what it is. It's like going to your piano teacher and getting a lesson, and you come home and you practice and you practice and you practice. And no matter how much you feel you've mastered that lesson, you go and you practice and you practice and you practice. And these are practices for people, not platitudes, not just here's the truth, and now you're good to go.
Yeah,
This is,
right.
yeah, which we all look for. We're all like, if I could just get that next seminar or next book or next what documentary or whatever, I'm good to
Yep.
go. But it takes practices, daily practices. Yeah. So I love
Well,
February. Go ahead.
I was going to say I'm a self-proclaimed workshopaholic,
Yes.
and so to to have searched for so many magic bullets over the years, and then to recognize that it's all just practice, and you just get
Yes.
better at the thing that you're trying to do. It's like, okay, so I haven't taken a workshop maybe in a year or two.
Not
You
saying
get
that
better. You get
not
better.
saying that we don't want people to take your workshops, but the
Right, of course, and of course, there's nothing wrong with taking workshops at all, but I noticed this pattern of myself of the myth of thinking, "Oh, this will save me. Oh, this will
yes,
save me. Oh, this will save
yes,
me." And
exactly.
so to break that story and be like, "I am already saving myself
Wow.
in living everyday life after loss," and to turn save from an event into, yeah, a practice.
A process and a practice. Yeah, I
Mhm.
am already saving myself.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah. So I loved February 14th and 15th, and I'm going to ask you to walk us through those.
Yeah, February 14th was an interesting one to write because there are a few days of the calendar year that are the same every year. And so Valentine's Day was one of them, and then Halloween was another. And the rest of them, because this book has been published in multiple countries, and so like 4th of July and things aren't relevant. But Valentine's Day, Halloween, New Year's Eve and New Year's Day are the same. And then the rest of the quotes are different. But February 14th, I knew I needed to talk about love because the whole rest of the world's going to be talking about love anyway. And on a day when everybody else is celebrating romantic love or partnership, especially for people who've lost a spouse, and even for people who've lost parents or children or family or coworkers, it's a day that can feel especially open heart surgery, pokey tender. So February 14th reads, "You will live in me always. Your words, your heart, your soul are all part of me. My heart is full of your memories. Thank you for the gift of your life. I will never forget you." And this is a quote by Amy Eldon. And to me, it resonates a little bit like a prayer or a blessing, not religious, but almost an honoring of the person. And the commentary here that I wrote is, there are some things that remain true across time. We will always love the person we lost. We will always carry them with us. We will always be full of the memories we made with them. On this day that celebrates love and relationships, know that these foundational truths can never be taken away from you. They are the lifetime commitment that grief makes to us in our heartbreak. And it's this subtle reframing of your relationship to your loved one in the physical world is gone. And in its place, or in addition to the memories that you continue to have, grief is stepping in as another kind of relationship to remind you that that kind of love, that depth of it, and the permanence of it is something that can't be taken away, even though their physical body is no longer here.
Read that last sentence again because I thought it was so brilliant.
Yes. On this day that celebrates love and relationships, know that these foundational truths can never be taken away from you. They are the lifetime commitment that grief makes to us in our heartbreak.
Wow. They are the lifetime commitment that grief makes to us in our heartbreak. Wow. There's a lot to ponder there. Amazing. And then the 14th.
Yeah.
The 15th, I mean.
The 15th, yes. February 15th. We can often produce feelings of love for ourselves when we do something loving for someone else. Celebrate the life of your loved one by volunteering at a local shelter, gifting a piece of your loved one's clothing, jewelry, or book collection to someone who would appreciate it, or donating to a charity they would have supported. Play your part in continuing your loved one's life by becoming a living channel for their love. Use your eyes, ears, hands, and mouth to become a messenger through which their love travels. How would your loved one want to show proof of their love in the world? You can make that happen.
So
And this one is so fun because it it injects a little creativity into the mix
yes.
because all of our loved ones are very different. The way that my mother showed love in the world is probably different than how some of your loved ones, David, would show their love in the world. And so generating these ideas for ways that they would like to continue on or use you as a channel for their love, I got a lot of creative suggestions for this one.
Yeah, no kidding. So my dad, who was my hero, passed away February 9th, 2015, and I put together his memorial, which we had on February 14th, and that out of that led me to being invited to work for Dignity Memorial Funeral Homes, launching their Celebrant program in Seattle before moving to Houston to do the same thing here. And when I think back about my dad, I have so many memories of him, and I feel like the work that I do is in honor of him because it came out of celebrating his life. But
Yeah.
I have so many memories of him and I volunteering together at homeless shelters, and he did that right up until about 6 months before he passed. And he would go down, like a Tuesday night down to Hope Mission, and he would work there, and he would, wow, all of a sudden that just touched a tender spot. He'd drag me along, me and my guitar, and I'd have to sing for the guys, and
Free entertainment.
that's exactly right. And he did that, working in the food bank and the homeless shelter and the men's shelter, literally till about 6 months before his passing. And at his funeral, we'd ordered way too much food, and so a lot of it didn't get eaten. And I was able to take some enormous platters of sandwiches to the local men's shelter that he volunteered at, and it just seemed so fitting. And reading February 15th, reading those thoughts about how would their love show up in the world. My dad's love showed up in the world by the way that he had a heart for the homeless people. And yeah, just the book just made me start to decide to start volunteering at a local shelter in my dad's memory. And I think it will make both him and me very, very happy. So thank you for that, Shelby. That was just the little nudge that I needed. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and even that reminds me, I mean, of a memory of my mom before she died, because we had the bizarre, I don't know if I want to call it a luxury, but we had the gift of knowing that she was dying. So her
Yes.
loss, while it was sudden, um, we knew that she was going to die. And so we had time to call in hospice and things like that. And she bulk ordered, my mom was a religious woman. She bulk ordered like 45 copies of Jesus Calling from our local bookstore. And she sat in the same chair in the living room. She had breast cancer that metastasized to her lungs. So she died by not being able to breathe. And so she had the oxygen tube in her nose. And she was a lefty, and so she'd sit in the left corner of the chair with her pen, and she wrote personalized notes to each and every one of her friends in these 45 books before she died. This was the week of her death. And when she could no longer write, she couldn't hold a pen anymore, she would dictate to my sister, and then she would just try and sign them. Um,
Wow.
and it gives me chills to think about, because even as she knew she was going to die, she was ensuring that some piece of her, in written form, in book form, in a book that had touched her heart so much, was going to live on through her friends and family.
Yes.
And in that moment, I didn't appreciate it for what it was. I think I was mad at God. So I was like, Jesus calling. It's like Jesus hung up on us. Like, I don't agree with this at all. I was so furious by the whole action itself. And I was like, there are so many other things you could be doing with your time, because you know you're going to die. And I never said any of these things out loud to her. But now, even thinking back, I was like, no, that's who she was, though.
Yes.
And she was thinking of not only leaving her own legacy, because I don't know if that was a forethought in her mind, is how can I be remembered, but how can I reassure my friends that they're going to be okay?
Yes.
And that was very much an energy that she
Yes.
projected and put out into the world. And um, so now it's very surreal. I think she always wanted to be an author herself, but kids and work came first. And so even having a book and fulfilling that dream for her in some
Yes.
kind of way, every time I sign one of these, I have a small flash back to that day where I remember her
Wow.
writing in and signing these books that she's going to give to her friends. And she died,
Wow.
I mean, less than 6 days later. So
Wow.
yeah, very surreal. And so when I think about being a channel for her love, I'm like, what can I write in here um,
Yeah.
that people really need to? How can I let them know they're going to be okay?
Yeah.
And so that was a lot of the driving force in this book.
But that phrase, how would their love show up in the world? That is
Mhm.
what a brilliant phrase. What a brilliant question. When you're inside the vortex of grief and you feel like you've lost everything that connected you to that person, to be able to ask yourself the question, if they were here, how would their love show up in the world? And then to be able to channel that um, that is just brilliant. Thank you. So, yeah, I will have to say, after 8 months of doing this, you're the first guest that made me cry. So, you've got that. So, so April 9th and 10th, talking about how grief's different every day, and you don't have to know how you're going to get through it. So, walk us through that.
Oh, yeah. April 9th reads, many grieving people picture grief as a never-ending ocean voyage. Some days are stormy and overwhelming, with big swells that crash into their little boat and leave it with broken boards and them with bruises. Other days are sunny and still, with very little movement at all. Consider keeping a captain's log of your grief in a notebook or on your phone. Once or twice a day, set an alarm to check in with your grief and rank its severity from 1 to 10. 1 being smooth sailing, and 10 being she's taking on water. Remember, the purpose of this exercise is not to see an improvement in your numbers. It's to recognize that your grief is different every single day. And I think you and I talked about this before we got on the mic today, in that one of the biggest fears that people have in the aftermath of loss is it's bad right now and it's going to be bad
Yes,
forever.
forever.
Um, Life is hard, life sucks, and then I die. Now that this has happened, my life is ruined, it's all over, I'm totally broken, it's irreparable, it's permanent, which part of it is. There is some truth in that. But then it's going to be awful forever and then I'll die. And one of the things that I try to work with grieving people so hard to see in their own lives is that even when each day seems the same, there are little bits and pieces of it. There are little nuances, there are interactions, there are even new thoughts that they think in their head that make that day different than the day before.
Yes.
And anything incremental that can prove to you that this is just a little bit different than what you were going through before is evidence and proof that something different is already coming. You don't have to wait for something different to arrive. Each day is already different. And I had to say the goal of this is not to get from a 10 down to a 1. It's not a linear thing of we're going to make grief go away, but just to recognize that grief has these peaks and valleys with it, and that's
Yes.
a normal expression of how grief looks, is to show up differently every single day.
Wow. And then the 10th.
Hmm. Let's see. Oh, this is one of my favorite quotes. Elizabeth Gilbert's one of my all-time favorite authors. She says, "Deep grief sometimes is almost like a specific location, a coordinate on a map of time. When you are standing in that forest of sorrow, you cannot imagine that you could ever find your way to a better place. But if someone can assure you that they themselves have stood in that same place and now have moved on, sometimes this will bring hope." And again, this is by Elizabeth Gilbert. And the commentary I wrote here is, it's tempting to leap forward into the future and try to imagine what the entire rest of your life will look like now that loss has occurred. Other people have made it out alive. Why shouldn't you? And exactly how are you going to get there? Take a deep breath and know that it's okay that you don't have all the answers right now. You don't even have to know the how, you just have to know the that. That one day you will be somewhere better than the forest of sorrow. And I love this because uncertainty is a hallmark of grief. If you're
Yes.
uncertain, you're probably in a season of grief. And I think this
Yes.
is very true for all of us right now in the midst of COVID-19 is I'm feeling uncertain. I don't know what's going to happen next. The ground beneath my feet is either shaky or gone. And I'm like, I believe there is grief here.
Yes.
And there's such a pressure to know, A, who we are, and B, what's going to happen next in the aftermath of loss, where we're going, what we're going to be up to, who we're going to see, what our life looks like now, and to have all these structures kind of figured out so we know what to do and we know where to go. Um, but it's impossible for that information to just download all at once
Yes.
in the aftermath of loss. To ask that of ourselves is kind of to demand that we be omniscient or to have all the answers or to be more powerful or more gosh able than we can as human beings. And so
Yes.
to ask that of ourselves is to ask ourselves to be inhuman, which
Yes.
is just an extreme act of unkindness.
Yes.
And so to allow ourselves to be like, I don't have all the answers and that's okay.
Yes.
I'm taking a deep breath every time I say that. I'm like, I didn't have all the answers. One of my very
Okay.
favorite authors, I didn't include her in the book. Her name is Morgan Harper Nichols, but she does art on Instagram. And one of her most popular pieces within the last month or so, in the midst of COVID, was these repeating lines of text on like an orange and teal background that says, "You don't have to have it all figured out tonight."
Wow.
And it was like this permission slip.
Wow.
You don't have to have it figured out tonight. You don't have to figure it all out tonight. It was like, rest, go to bed, go to bed.
Yeah.
You will
Yeah.
wake up tomorrow and try again. Beautiful, beautiful reassurances.
Wow. Um, so, this came through a little darker than I wanted it to. I'm not sure why. But I can read it on my. Let me just
Sure.
read the comment. That's supposed to be in white. Apparently, I didn't set the font. I don't want to write a long story. This is from, I don't want to write a long story, but in my mid-20s, I experienced the traumatic and tragic loss of my boyfriend at the time. It was 2004. After all these years, I never really allowed myself to grieve. I didn't even know how to do that. It's been a heavy burden in my life, and affected me in numerous and various ways. It's not until this year I had an awakening, and I'm now trying to process and heal from it. Even though it's been almost 17 years, it's felt very raw and real. I'm glad I found this live. And at the beginning, she said, "Hi, Dave. Hi, Shelby. Can you read June 2nd for me, please? Thank you."
Yeah.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
for a
And I
moment.
see this comment coming too, and I'm not sure if your name is pronounced Malin or Malin.
Mullen.
But thank you for commenting here. And I'll tell you something I tell a lot of my clients is like time means nothing in the aftermath of loss. We feel grief throughout the rest of our lives, no matter when our loss happened. But also, and this is something that's coming up a lot with COVID-19, we often don't get to grieve deeply until we feel safe enough to do so. So the circumstances of our lives, our jobs, our other relationships, our health often need to come to a place of some kind of stability or homeostasis before we're like, okay, now I feel ready to explore the deep emotions that live here in my grief. And so you're like, it's been 17 years and the emotions are still really raw, even though it's been 17 years. And I'm like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It may have taken 17 years to be able to access this depth, and that's okay. I think that's a part of grief too. And I love that you selected June 2nd. I'm not sure if it's a death anniversary, a birthday, an anniversary, or any other meaningful day for you. But this is one of my favorites. I still have to do this with myself too. And my loss is 7 years out now. It reads, write yourself a personal permission slip for grief. On a sheet of paper, write, I give you permission to feel, insert emotions. I give you permission to behave like, insert behaviors. I give you permission to cry whenever, insert triggers. Sign your name at the bottom and hang your permission slip up somewhere where you will see it every day. Each time you pass by it, remind yourself that you are the first and best person to give yourself the space and the grace you need to experience grief. And I love this because so often we are the people that keep ourselves from feeling our grief. We are the people who fail to give the permission, when in fact we are the people with the most power to give permission to grieve.
All right, let me bring up, we've got another comment here that's just, these are just like, and I'm going to try to bring this up, see if we get this one. No, it's in dark. But Jacqueline, and you can see them on your end as well, Shelby. Um, I lost my daughter 4 years and 5 months ago. At the age of almost 3 years old, she was born with Mobius syndrome, a rare neurological condition that affected her facial muscles. She could not smile. She passed away suddenly and tragically. It's been so hard, but I try to turn my grief into joy, as I know that is what she would want. I now raise money in her memory for Sick Kids Hospital. Wow. Letting her love show up in the world. I now raise money in her memory for Sick Kids Hospital, but I just miss her so much. Could you please read July 28th for me, please?
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that too, Jacqueline, because so often I think people are afraid to express grief out in the world beyond their physical bodies. And so to have this physical, tangible expression of grief is I am raising money for something outside of myself. I'm contributing to a cause. We just talked about how can we be a channel for the love of the people that we've lost in the world, and allowing that to happen is really beautiful and lovely. And July 28th is special and close to my heart because it has to do with how friendships change in the aftermath of loss. And it reads as thus. It's normal for friendships to become strained in the aftermath of loss. And it's also normal for you to be too exhausted, too overwhelmed, and too heartbroken to have the energy to reach out to your friends right away. While losing a friendship is painful, it's okay to let it slide for the moment while you tend to yourself and your grief. When you're feeling ready, connect to your friend through a letter or email message. Say something like, I know it's been a while since we've spoken, but I wanted to let you know that I was really hurt when you, and then these are examples, stopped calling me on Sundays. You may have a good reason for it, but the story I'm telling myself is, and you can insert your own here, that you thought I was too negative. I would really hate if this story were true, and I'm open to hearing your thoughts on this. I miss having you as a friend in my life, and I hope to hear from you soon. If your friend responds thoughtfully, consider resuming the friendship. If they meet you with defensiveness, anger, or silence, consider the friendship lost and seek out people who are more accepting of you and your grief. And I included this in the book because one of the biggest pain points my clients come to me with is my friends and family, my coworkers, even strangers in the grocery store who I've come to rely on through the years, they just don't get it. They don't understand. They've vanished, or they meet me with platitudes, or they seem to have drifted away. And the story I'm telling myself is that it's all my fault, or that my grief has made me an undesirable person to be around. And so this is kind of a mini script for trying to reintroduce or re-include that friendship in your life, because in the immediate aftermath of loss, it's kind of okay if they go by the wayside for a bit. Maintaining friendships may not be your first priority after somebody you love, especially a child, dies. But when you kind of, like, when the numbness wears off, or the fog starts to lift, or whatever phrasing you'd like to use in the aftermath of loss, and you're able to start seeing the world and the people around you again, you're like, wow, I haven't talked to Jill in 6 months. Where did she go? And so if you'd like to reincorporate that friendship into your life or find out what happened, it's a really good place to start nourishing friendships again and finding out whether they are things you would like to continue in the aftermath of your loss, because grief really disrupts our friendships and the people that we're connected to.
Wow, thank you. And I loved what you said before, just to circle back to one of the things you said to Mullen. Lots of times we don't grieve, or we don't allow the public mourning. We don't allow ourselves, we don't grieve until we feel safe. I just thought that was so well said and brilliant, because just so true. So true. Wow.
I think it's very true with what we're experiencing right now too with COVID-19, is that we are in a massive grief event right now, and also the many areas of our lives are so uncertain. So I would not be surprised. Modern Loss wrote a wonderful piece on this on their blog about 4 or 5 days ago. But there will be aftershocks of this grief 7, 10, 20 years from now, where people will look back and recognize how traumatizing
Yes.
this year was for us collectively, or even for them individually. And we can't grieve the entire depth of it right now because we're in the middle of it.
Yes.
And so it often takes a rebalancing out of all the other facets of our lives in order to be like, okay, now I can actually explore the depth of, wow, that was grief.
Yes. So let me reference something from April 24th. We're going to run out of time real quick here, and I have like 20 more dates that I want you to read. But just to follow up on that, April 24th, you have this little phrase in there: in the world of grief, there is no measuring. And I love that. It's not, my grief is bigger than your grief, or I lost this, therefore, whatever. And I think the example that you use, if a child loses a toy, or a adult, whatever, it's not a contest. In the world of grief, there's no measuring, and there's no judgment, and there's never a place for saying, it's been 17 years, what's wrong with me? There is nothing wrong with you. Nothing. It's the way grief works.
Right.
So,
right.
November 12th, I'm going to pull a couple more threads out of you. The fact that we grieve is is evidence of how completely we are able to love.
Yeah.
Talk to me about
I
that.
tell my clients sometimes that we would not be grieving if the thing we lost did not matter. And so grief is just massive proof, evidence, display that the thing that has died, the thing that's gone missing, the thing that we can no longer have access to, we gave a crap about it.
Yes.
PG. Like, this mattered and aligned with us at such a core level that it is physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally painful to be separated from it, or to have it ripped from us. And so people are like, I hate that I'm grieving. I hate that this exists. And I'm like, sometimes I've actually learned to appreciate grief because it shows me how much I actually care.
Yes.
Because to not be grieving is to not really be invested, or to not love at such a great depth.
And it shows you the capacity that you have for love.
Immense. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
Yes.
I was on another podcast the other day called You, Me, Empathy. And something I love uncovering with my clients is, look how much more of you there is to see.
Yes.
As you are grieving, it is counterbalanced by the immense weight and depth of your love. And it's like, wow, there's so much more of you here. Yes.
and your heart continues to open, and you continue the practice, and your heart continues to open. Ah, it's amazing. All right, take us to December 31st.
Yes, this is one of my favorites. This is actually a practice I started doing in my life, and I knew when we were coming to New Year's and Your Grief Your Way that I had to include it in this too. So December 31st reads, decorate a clear empty jar and place it next to your bed. Each night before you go to sleep, recollect one positive moment you experienced that day. This could be as small as notice the birds in my backyard, or as big as survived my loved one's birthday. Write your positive moment on a slip of paper, fold it up, and place it in the jar. Do this every day for a year. Then, this time next year, dump out and unfold your year's worth of positive moments. Not only will you experience an outpouring of warmth recalling positive memories from the previous year, you'll also form a more positive outlook toward the year ahead. Saturating your brain with evident positive things happened in the past gives it permission to dream up more positive experiences in the future. I'm sending comfort and love to you in the new year.
That is so awesome. So awesome. What a great practice. What a great way to spend New Year's Eve. Opening 365 little notes to yourself and remembering, yeah, that wonderful thing happened, that wonderful thing happened. How that would prepare your heart for the year ahead and prepare your heart to be ready for good things, to get through the forest of sorrow.
Yes, and especially in years where we feel like, like in 2020, where it's like this year's been garbage,
Yeah.
on many levels. It can be this proof or this evidence that even in the midst of this, there were good things that happening. There were birds singing outside. Your friends invited you to go hiking. You got to watch a sunset. You got some kind of award or a promotion at work. You published your second book. Like, holy crap.
Yes.
Even in the midst of a year that
Even
is
in the
this, there are
midst.
still things happening. And so it reminds you that there's never 100% bad. And just in the midst of grief, too, there's never really 100% good either. There's always a 1% of grief that lingers. But even in the seasons of bad or of darkness, there is a 1% of joy or a positivity, too.
Wow. Thank you. Let me bring up both of your books. Permission to Grieve, Creating Grace, Space, and Room to Breathe in the Aftermath of Loss, which, as you can see, is available on Amazon Books or from a local bookseller. And then the book that we've been looking at today, Your Grief, Your Way, Year of Practical Guidance and Comfort After Loss. And again, the Kindle is available, but I love the paperback book because I love feeling it in my hands. I love, I love making stars and little notes and all this. And this is a book to write in. This is a book to prompt you to get your journal out. So you sit down with this book in one hand, your journal and pencil in the other, and off you go. And it's just a daily practice, 5 minutes, here and there, and yeah. So, Shelby, thank you for being with us. I always try to close our live with some variation of this question: what is one important insight about grief that you would want us to know?
It goes so much farther than death.
Wow.
I think if the world knew how to acknowledge that grief happens anytime what we knew as normal changes
Yes.
or ends permanently, that there was grief living there, that we would be able to treat it really with the respect and the space and the tenderness that it deserves.
Wow. The respect and the tenderness that it deserves. Wonderful words to end off the show. Thank you, Shelby.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been such a joy. And thank you for everybody who watched live with us too.
Yes, thank you so much. I hope this has been a help. Even after this live is over, you can still leave some comments or questions, and I'll be coming back to review the comments interact with you as we go forward. And don't forget to click on live notifications so you can get a reminder whenever it is we're going live. And please feel free to share these on your social media platforms so that the effect of this is multiplied through all of us working together. Again, thank you for being here, and be safe, everybody.